I discovered my wife's affair, stayed silent for years, and planned the perfect revenge to win custody, keep the house, and reclaim my life. Story 1. Much love, guys. The best revenge is a happy life and having your cheating ex pay you child support. Grab a cup of coffee or tea. This is a long story. I apologize, but I hope it's worth your time to read. My revenge began while discovering my wife's infidelity. Let's call her Carrie. After 14 years of marriage and 3 kids, I saw a text appear on her work phone for just a few seconds that would forever change my life. It was a message that was sexually graphic and had no business being on anyone's work phone. It was on the lock screen, and the sender's name was visible. Let's call him Perry. Background: I married Carrie when I was 25 and she was 22. I was teaching high school at the time, and she was a registered nurse. After having our first child, Carrie became a stay-at-home mom. Money was tight, so I took on an admin role in my department and coached 2 sports for the stipends. We made it, and after a few annual pay raises, I stopped coaching and took advantage of a program to earn an administrative credential. Once I made the jump to administration, our last child was ready for preschool, and Carrie decided she wanted to go back to work. Nursing jobs are always available, but they're not always the best positions. Carrie pretty much had to start back at the bottom, working alongside nurses that were a lot younger than she was and could work back-to-back double shifts. That took a toll on Carrie. When she asked her supervisor about other positions, she was told that without a BSN Bachelor of Science in Nursing, she wasn't going to move up. At the time, Carrie only had a 2-year ADN associate degree in nursing. I told her that between preschool, after-school rec, and my retired mother, who is always willing to pick up the kids from school and watch them, I'd support her getting a BSN. It took her 3 years, but eventually she had a BSN and was promoted to a better position at the hospital. Things were good for a while. We had plenty of money, so we finally moved into our own McMansion, bought new cars, etc. I'd moved from school admin to the district admin, so I had more time to spend with Carrie and the kids. She was working a more predictable schedule, and even with my often long hours at work, this changed, allowing us to finally take vacations to all the places we put on the list during our honeymoon. She kept that list in our wedding album. At 7-point-something years later, I noticed she was carrying 2 phones with her. When I asked her about it, she said it was a phone provided by the hospital. I didn't question her explanation because my district had also given me the option of a phone stipend, which I took instead. Again, months went by, and I thought we were a happy, perfect family. I charged my phone in our den, while she charged her phones in our guest bedroom that doubled as a computer room, so we could keep tabs on the kids while they surfed the web. I was updating software on the computer when I saw a light around her work phone. She had a habit of always turning her phones face down when charging them. Out of curiosity, I reached over to the phone and flipped it over. A message popped up on the lock screen, asking her when she'd like to be properly pleased again, but in much more graphic language. I also saw that Perry sent it. The world stopped around me. I just froze. My first thoughts were, what the hell was that about? It's a work phone. That kind of message gets people fired. Then it hit me. Was Carrie having an affair? It's amazing how the brain works. I suddenly started remembering a lot of things Carrie had done that seemed odd, but I'd either dismissed them myself or immediately accepted her explanation. She was always walking out of the room to answer a call or return a text, and claimed that it would violate HIPAA, Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, if I ever heard her talking about a patient. I accepted this because education has similar privacy laws regarding students. She would sometimes come home with a faint smell of cologne on her clothes and claimed it was from helping to move male patients. Again, I accepted this at face value, but it always struck me as odd. It seemed to be the same scent of cologne. Once the proverbial barn door was opened, I started seeing a lot of things that I'd missed before. Our love life in the bedroom had cooled off considerably, which wasn't helped by her having to leave the house at odd hours to fill in for other nurses that called in sick. I also recalled when I'd seen the name Perry before, and a call to the hospital confirmed he was a doctor there. For the next week or so, I was walking around in a daze, trying to put all the pieces together. One of our kids had left a book in Carrie's car, so it was an excuse to visit the hospital. Carrie told me personal visits were frowned upon. My kids went up to get Carrie's car key. I'd forgotten my key to her car at home. I talked to a nurse in the lobby and joked about how work phones seemed like a blessing, but all they do is put you on call 24 hours a day. This led to her eventually telling me that the hospital was too cheap to give cell phones to nurses, so only high-level executives got them, which didn't include Carrie. With pretty much everything confirmed, I took some personal time off the next day to talk to a divorce lawyer. The news she gave me was horrible. We lived in a community property state with no-fault divorce. I made more money than Carrie. She'd been the primary caretaker of the kids, and we'd been married for more than 10 years. Basically, if I filed for divorce, I'd be screwed, lose the house, pay alimony, she'd get a huge chunk of my retirement, and I'd pay child support for the next decade unless I was lucky enough to be awarded joint custody. The worst thing she told me was that it didn't matter that she cheated. It didn't matter. I was crushed. There was only one person I could trust with this kind of information. She was a fellow teacher that had also made the jump to administration but was stuck at a school site. Let's call her Anne. Anne had been married at 19, but her marriage was annulled when he got some other woman pregnant. Since then, she'd focused on her career, and we found we were kind of kindred spirits in a lot of ways regarding K-12 education. I talked to Anne. She said something to me that changed my whole mindset. If you don't like the hand you're dealt, change the deck. I realized I had two problems. I made more money than Carrie, and she had more time than me to be the primary caretaker of the kids. The second issue was actually kind of easy. At every district office, there are jobs that are fast-tracked to higher positions, and there are jobs that administrators suffer through, like mess or KP duty in the military. One of these dead-end regulatory positions was open. Again, ambitious administrators leave after a couple of years when a better position opens up. I sat down with our district superintendent and asked about being transferred to that position. At first, he was shocked, but I told him it was my time to take one for the team, and it would fill a hole in my admin experience. He agreed. It was really just crunching numbers with no personnel or student interaction, so I could set my schedule, even take a laptop home and work there. With my new free time, I began taking the kids to school, picking them up from school, not leaving them in after school rec or having my mother watch them, and taking them home. I'd help them with their homework, make dinner, etc. While the end goal was to become their primary caretaker, I can't explain how much I really enjoyed taking a more active role in their day-to-day lives. My salary hadn't been reduced, so I needed to find a way for Carrie to make a lot more money than she was in her current nursing position. I remember Carrie being mad after she earned her BSN, and a supervisor told her that in the future bachelor's degrees will be worthless and everyone will need at least a master's degree. Carrie had worked hard to get a BSN, and that supervisor's comment pissed all over her hard work. I talked to her about starting an MSN Master of Science in Nursing program. I told her that since I had a much more flexible work schedule, I would keep taking care of the kids. She was reluctant at first. Then I said, "You could have every evening free to study or go to class, whatever you want to do." I saw her eyes immediately light up, probably thinking that she could spend more time with Perry. To make sure she was actually completing her MSN courses, I paid her tuition and fees directly to her university. It was going to take her between 2 and 3 years to finish. Those years were rough, at times. I could tell every time she was rushing off or coming back from seeing Perry. There was an excitement or sense of satisfaction in her eyes that just wasn't there when she was doing her coursework. I had to either smile or pretend I didn't notice. My temper got short at times, and I found myself in arguments over petty nonsense. A couple of times I almost blew the whole charade, having to bite my tongue and apologize rather than scream insults at her that she deserved. Anne remained my confidant throughout this. I'd recommended her for my previous fast-track position, and she joined me at the district office. Anne was qualified, hardworking, ambitious, and only needed a foot in the door to impress the higher-ups. I even got a few pats on the back for recommending her after she impressed everyone. Anne and I started our own affair. It wasn't some hot-blooded, passionate romance, but two friends giving each other what they needed. Without Anne, I wouldn't have been able to maintain the charade of being the oblivious cuckold. I never know if I pronounced that right. But when Carrie would come home smiling after spending time with Perry, I was able to bear it, smiling back because I had my own lover. After 3.5 years, Carrie completed her MSN and was promoted at the hospital. Her salary went up substantially and was now higher than mine. When the kids and I made her a congratulations dinner, I made a joke about her being the breadwinner for the family, and she laughed, joking back that I should be a stay-at-home dad now. A month later, I went back to the lawyer, who didn't remember me at first, and told her the financial situation had drastically changed. With these new facts, she drafted the petition and filed it. When the kids were with my mother, I had Carrie served. The deputy knocked on our front door, and I let him in, pointing at my wife. He asked her name and then handed her a copy of the divorce petition. With the deputy standing there, I told Carrie I knew all about her affair with Perry, but I didn't tell her how long I'd known. I told her to go be happy with her doctor lover. She screamed at me, tried to lie, and then made the mistake of rushing towards me. The deputy stopped her and warned her that women go to jail for domestic violence too. Now, he suggested she pack a bag to stay somewhere else. Carrie left after I promised not to tell the kids about her affair. I didn't tell the kids, but I told my mother, who told my sister, who told her kids, who told their cousins, my kids. It took a few days, but eventually, the kids knew that Dad was divorcing Mom because she had a boyfriend. In the end, the court granted the divorce, giving me primary custody of our kids because I was already the primary caretaker. I kept the house with a promise I'd refinance to buy out Carrie's half. She was ordered to pay child support, and I used that fact to negotiate with her to give up any rights to my retirement if I bought her out. I was able to refinance my home. It was the era when banks threw money at everyone to buy or refinance a mortgage, and with a little money borrowed from my parents, I bought out Carrie's community property interest in the home and in my retirement. The day she signed all the paperwork with my lawyer, finally ending any possible financial obligations to her, was the happiest I've been. I felt like I could finally breathe. I celebrated with Anne, who'd been my rock through all of it. I'm not ashamed to say, through the years I'd cried many times in her arms. Anne and I would eventually marry. She got promoted to a higher position, and I was convinced to take my previous position at the district when my youngest child reached high school. Carrie and I got along well after the divorce. We took the kids to family therapy and worked out the CO parenting thing. For the first few months, she took a beating from the kids about why she needed a boyfriend when Daddy was there all along. Between the kids and the therapists raking her over the coals, I didn't have to say anything at all. Carrie missed a lot of time with the kids because of her now legitimately busy work schedule, and I felt bad. My kids were missing time with their mother, so I encouraged them to talk to her on the phone instead. When Carrie found out I'd proposed to Anne, she congratulated me. I told her it's okay for her to marry Perry too. She got sad. She told me that Perry had started seeing another woman, a younger nurse at the hospital, because with her new position she didn't have time for him, and when they did get together she wasn't fun anymore. My ex-wife, the woman who cheated on me and destroyed our marriage, was looking to me for sympathy. I had none to give. What I had was years of anger and frustration, years of knowing some man was sleeping with my wife. I'd lost weight from not being able to eat. I'd suffered hypertension and had to confide in my doctor why it wasn't the stress of my job. I had to listen to my dentist complaining about how I was grinding, and listen to him telling me I needed dental implants if it kept up. There were times when I had to be intimate with Carrie to keep up the charade, fortunately infrequently, only to lie that I wanted to use condoms to remind us how we used to have sex when we were dating, or because I might have a bladder infection. Then go take an STD test anyway and wait for the results before seeing Anne again. But in the end, it was all worth it. Sure, Carrie got a big payout when I bought her out of the house in my retirement, which she was trickling back to me through child support, but she lost everything else. Her kids only saw her every other weekend and spent a couple of holidays with her. Perry dumped her, and he was no great catch anyway, since he was twice divorced with 5 kids. Paying alimony and child support through the nose. I kept my kids, my house, my income, my retirement. I got Anne, and I am genuinely happy. All in a community property state with no-fault divorce. If that's not pro-revenge, then I don't know what is. Story 2. You demand we work overtime for free? Enjoy trying to open the store with no employees. First off, on mobile, non-English speaker. Second, unfortunately, this story came back to mind due to the recent death of the hero in the story. Grumpy, you will be missed. I've met Grumpy in Narcotics Anonymous. He volunteered there after they helped him and became my sponsor. Seeing that I was trying to get my act together, he offered me my first job out of high school. Grumpy was the manager of a store for a company that sold everything you need to build a house, from cement and bricks to custom-made cupboards. I started as a loader, filling the trucks that were making deliveries. A little background for the company, it plays an important part for later. When they started back in the early 1980s, they sold everything you need to build a brick-and-mortar home, wholesale to professionals. During their first expansion, they got a really good reputation for their prices of power tools, custom cupboards, and landscaping, including custom-made garden furniture. The stores were basically big warehouses. In the mid-1990s, they opened their doors to the general public, which, accompanied by a rising trend of DIY do-it-yourself, skyrocketed their sales. That brought a second, smaller wave of expansion and the opening of the online store, first only with phone orders and later with a proper site. When I joined, they were doing a third shift on their business plan. They'd cut down on things that weren't big sellers, like bricks and concrete, and were focusing more on the big sellers: custom-made furniture, landscaping tools, and for some weird reason, plumbing. My first 8 months on the job was a dream. Grumpy was an excellent manager, having started in the company roughly the same age I was and being promoted through the ranks, had developed a very distinct managerial style. His concept was simple. If my employees are happy, they work better and provide better services, which leads to better sales. That meant that while Grumpy managed one of the inner city stores, meaning medium to small size compared to the others, We were fourth in revenue nationwide and first in customer happiness. And then the reason for his nickname, why everyone called him Grumpy, a nickname he was kind of proud of, he was far from it. The reason was he had a medical condition that affected his nerves and that had left him with a permanent frown on his face. He had declined promotions due to that condition, knowing the extra stress would make his condition flare up, meaning he wouldn't be as effective as he would like. His medical condition flared up unexpectedly, and Grumpy had to be hospitalized and be on sick leave for a time. HQ decided to not have one of Grumpy's assistants be an acting manager for the duration, but to bring in a regional manager to take over the store for the duration. Let's call him Wilhelm. I'm not sure if I pronounced that right. Wilhelm was the exact opposite of Grumpy. He was younger than Grumpy. He was in his late 20s, Grumpy was in his late 30s, had a business degree, and hadn't worked the floor at all. He was hired from the beginning as an office drone and climbed his way to regional manager. The reason he was put in charge of our store had to do with a change of the business plan of the company. You see, the change of focus had created a lot of empty space in the stores. A supermarket chain had approached the company with an offer to rent the empty space, especially for inner-city stores. The company had accepted and placed regional managers in key stores to help with integration. The thing is, the supermarket chain had a reputation for being bad employers. That was reinforced by one of our tellers, who had worked for them for 3 years before quitting to join us. Wilhelm didn't help. Also, his managerial style was based on only one concept: make more money in any way possible. He started by changing our schedule from monthly to weekly, raising the sales targets to unrealistic heights, and always demanded more. In the first 2 weeks, 6 experienced people had left, 4 quit, and 2 were fired and replaced by young, inexperienced people that were easier to manipulate. And then the integration happened. The floor was the first to feel the problem. The supermarket opened its doors and was understaffed. Wilhelm started sending people over to help for 4 to 6 hours, while also demanding they work their regular shifts. If someone declined, he or she was written up, 2 write-ups in 6 months, and you were fired. Then Wilhelm came to lay down the law on the loading bay. The loading bay was shared between the 2 stores. Wilhelm declared that we had to first help the 2 guys of the supermarket and load their trucks first because their products were perishable, and then start loading our own trucks. That would throw our delivery schedule to the wind. The loading crew worked 5 in the morning to 1. We loaded first the trucks that had longer to travel, so they would be ready to leave at 7 at the latest. The company had a next-day delivery policy for a 150-mile radius. What Wilhelm declared meant we couldn't start loading our trucks before 7:30, and they couldn't start their routes before 9:30. We said as much, but Wilhelm didn't care. He said we had to do both jobs. When someone inquired about overtime, Wilhelm said no. He said we already made too much money with unsocial hours 5 to 8 and leaving early, so he wouldn't approve overtime. So, from a nice environment that you wanted to work for, we all started getting miserable. We lost 10 people in the loading crew in a month because of the new rules. The new hires didn't last long. The floor was a mess also, started turning personnel faster than a dollar hooker. Anyone who was staying was either looking for another job, was afraid of unemployment, or was too young to know better. The sales had a very small decline, but customer happiness was plummeting fast. After almost 6 months, all the old guard that was left was ready to quit, but our savior came back. Almost 6 months from the day he was hospitalized, Grumpy walks into the store to claim his rightful position. He isn't a knight in shining armor, riding a pure white horse, carrying a legendary sword. He is in normal attire, slightly limping, and holding a cane. We have a welcome back party and have a small glimmer of hope that now he is back. We are informed that Grumpy will be on light duties for 2 weeks before he becomes the manager again. Despite Grumpy being back, Wilhelm still remains the regional manager, which means he outranks Grumpy and makes it very clear in private meetings with all of us. If he caught us complaining to Grumpy, we were as good as gone. Still, a few of us are planning to have a meeting with Grumpy after the 2 weeks, letting him get his sea legs back. But another department had other ideas. During his reign of terror, the only department that Wilhelm couldn't control was the workshop. He knew that if he treated them as badly as he did to us, they would quit. And the sales would go from a small decline to the bottom of the barrel. Real quick, as I said, custom-made furniture was the #1 seller. So the head carpenter had a meeting with Grumpy on the 2nd day, talking about the future of the workshop. In reality, the guy spilled the beans on Wilhelm. With the pretext of catching up with the changes, Grumpy has meetings with everyone, learning what Wilhelm has done and why he had so many new staff. You could feel he was getting angrier with every meeting. He had also had an eye-opening meeting with the manager of the supermarket. Finally, the time had come that he is the manager again. The revenge, on his first day back as manager, Grumpy notifies everyone of a mandatory meeting after the store is closed. He has a solution. So, we gather in the store after closing hours and Grumpy lays out the plan. For the next couple of days, nobody except for him is coming to the store. If anyone calls us, we should direct them to him, which we did when we started getting calls about the store being closed. Grumpy's answer to the HQ was simple. The staff was working on a second job during their shifts, which is a breach of contract, so I had to fire them all and find new staff. That caught HQ's attention because nothing of the sort was reported in the past 6 months. They asked Grumpy for evidence, which he happily provided, with our written testimonies, which brought a shitstorm on Wilhelm. You see, Wilhelm had an arrangement with the supermarket manager. He got a kickback from our unpaid labor for the supermarket, and the manager offered the same thing to Grumpy. He also included that Wilhelm regularly declined to sign overtime, which meant that if any one of us went to the labor department, the company would get a really huge fine. The aftermath, Wilhelm quickly got fired. We all received calls to interview with the company for an open position. We all received severance pay for our firing, plus most of the unpaid overtime, about 80% of it. Almost all of us went back to work with a small pay raise based on experience. The company took a long, hard look at the supermarket chain and distanced themselves from them. They stayed until their lease was over, but no shared employees anymore, and a lot of theirs jumped ship to our side. Next time Grumpy had to take time off, one of his assistants took over. 2 did a stellar job, leading to being promoted to managers in other stores. Grumpy brought back his usual managerial style, leading again to a rise in sales and customer happiness. I left the job 3 years later for a better paying position, but I still remember Grumpy as one of the best managers I ever had.